On December 12, 1939, as the sun barely scraped the horizon in the Finnish north, a Soviet reconnaissance patrol of 15 men cut a trail through the dense pine forest. The scene was breathtakingly beautiful, but cruelly deceptive. The temperature was a savage -40 degrees Celsius. For the men of the Red Army, the cold was a physical constant, a relentless enemy that turned their heavy wool greatcoats into stiff, restricting garments. Every labored breath they took condensed instantly, creating frozen fog on their scarves and helmets. These men represented the largest military machine on the planet, the supposedly invincible Red Army of Joseph Stalin. They were here to crush Finland, a nation of fewer than 4 million people, in what their high command predicted would be a swift, 10-day operation. The men, though cold, were confident. They were loud. Their steel equipment clanked and echoed through the desolate white landscape, announcing their presence without concern. They saw no one. They were catastrophically wrong. The first shot was a sound that shouldn't have been heard. Not a rifle crack, but a chilling whisper, a sharp PHT instantly absorbed by the thick, unforgiving snow. The man at the rear of the patrol simply folded into the white drift. No explosion. No scream. He was just gone. The lieutenant leading the patrol froze. He whirled around, scanning the endless trees. He saw nothing but his 12 remaining men, looking back at him in dawning horror. The silence itself became a weapon. The second shot came exactly 3 seconds later. The lieutenant's eyes snapped forward just as his radioman, 200 meters ahead, collapsed face-first onto his gear. This time, the lieutenant claimed he heard the faintest sound, a terrible, subtle hiss just before the impact, like a sigh of death across the snow. Panic erupted. The patrol abandoned their disciplined formation and dove desperately for the low snowbanks, seeking cover where none existed. The snow was not a shield, it was an open canvas, and they were the targets. The shots continued, measured and relentless. Crack. A man trying to unlimber his machine gun slumped over the weapon. Crack. A sergeant pointing a direction fell backward, his face frozen in confusion. Crack. 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 In less than 3 minutes, 12 men were dead. The 3 remaining survivors, utterly terrified and shattered, did not run. They lay utterly frozen in their positions for over 4 hours, buried only inches deep in the snow, praying they would not be next. When they finally crawled back to their lines, their report was met with disbelief. Their account made no sense. No muzzle flash, no sound of a sniper team, no sign of where the shots had originated. The terrified Soviet officers assigned a supernatural name to the phantom killer, Blya Smirt. A ghost. The White Death. What those soldiers didn't know, what the entire Red Army command was about to learn, was that this phantom was not a supernatural entity. It was a 33-year-old farmer. A quiet man barely 5 feet, 3 inches tall. A man who had just declared a personal war against an entire empire, doing it with a trick so simple and so counterintuitive that it would change the rules of modern warfare forever. To understand the sheer magnitude of Simo Häyhä's one-man campaign, we must first understand the catastrophic political and military failure that enabled it. This was not a fair fight, but a blunder of historic proportions orchestrated by Joseph Stalin. The Red Army's arrogance was not born of genuine military superiority, but of profound political weakness, exposed through declassified internal Soviet archives. The seeds of the Winter War disaster were sown in the years preceding 1939 with the Great Purge. Stalin, paranoid about his political position, systematically eliminated the most experienced and strategically brilliant officers in his own ranks. An estimated 30,000 officers were executed, including 90% of all generals and 80% of all colonels. He decapitated his military leadership, replacing highly trained veterans who understood complex logistics and winter tactics with politically obedient but tactically inept commissars. The result was a brittle, top-heavy command structure built on fear, not competence. This political weakness dictated the military doctrine. The Red Army's core strategy, deep battle, relied on massive armored force to overwhelm any defense. For Finland, this translated not into meticulous planning, but a political mandate: attack with overwhelming, reckless force, regardless of terrain or conditions. We know the extent of this arrogance from documents revealing the Soviet Ninth Army's logistical blueprint. They literally expected the war to be over in 10 days. Their supply trains carried insufficient winter rations and almost no Arctic-grade maintenance materials. The heavy, dark-colored uniforms issued to the troops were fine for a European summer, but they were a glaring, fatal beacon against the snow. Their powerful T-28 tanks were uselessly equipped with automotive grease that solidified into concrete in the -40 cold. The entire strategy was built on the premise of a rapid, bloodless political conquest, not a grueling winter war. When Field Marshal Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim and the Finns refused Stalin's demands for territory, the Soviet Union retaliated by staging a false flag operation, the shelling of Manila, to justify the invasion on November 30, 1939. The raw comparison of military assets illustrates the scale of the strategic humiliation to come. The Red Army deployed 1 million soldiers and 6,000 tanks and 3,000 aircraft. Finland mustered only 300,000 men, mostly civilian militia, with 32 tanks and barely over 100 aircraft. The world media, seeing only the numbers on a map, declared Finland's doom. The Soviet troops packed their dress uniforms, expecting a parade in Helsinki within 2 weeks. They did not pack enough warm socks, oil for their rifles, or, critically, respect for the land they were invading. They looked at the size of the enemy. The Finns looked at the weaknesses of the terrain. The Finnish defense strategy was a profound exercise in asymmetrical warfare. They realized they could not win a conventional war, so they chose to fight a strategic war defined by the land itself. The Finns had a national spirit that governed their defense, Sisu, a kind of indomitable, reckless, and profound determination. It was a refusal to submit, a cold, hard grit that perfectly suited the Arctic battlefield. Their military strategy became a direct extension of this spirit. The landscape was their greatest ally. 70% of Finland was covered in dense forests, swamps, and rock, creating natural choke points. The Finns did not try to stop the armored columns. They allowed the Soviets to follow the few passable roads, forcing their massive, motorized divisions into single, exposed lines. This vulnerability gave rise to the legendary Motti tactics. Finnish ski troops, clad entirely in white, blending perfectly into the background, would move silently through the trees. They were expert cross-country skiers, giving them mobility that the road-bound Soviets could not match. The ski troops would ambush and destroy the column's crucial elements: the field kitchens, the radio operators, and the officers. This act would effectively sever the column into smaller, isolated, Motti, a Finnish word for a pocket of surrounded troops. Once the Soviet units were isolated, the war became a brutal siege against the cold. The Finns did not rush to fight these Motti head-on. They let the winter do the rest. At -40 degrees, fuel lines froze, engines seized, and tank grease turned to concrete. The Soviet troops, exposed in their dark uniforms, stood out like black dots against a white sheet, easy targets for hit-and-run attacks. Furthermore, the Soviet supply line failure meant the trapped soldiers quickly ran out of food and fuel. They froze to death by the thousands, often found standing up, their rifles immobilized by ice. The Finnish ski troops would appear from nowhere, fire with devastating precision into the immobilized Motti, and vanish back into the trees, perpetuating the fear that they were fighting not soldiers, but phantoms. This psychological warfare was crucial. The Finns were fighting a national defense, masters of their terrain, skilled at self-sufficiency, and powered by Sisu. The Soviets were fighting a political war, unprepared, poorly led, and freezing to death by order of their own high command. While the major battles raged along the Mannerheim line, the true, decentralized slaughter was happening in the forests, where the massive Red Army met the cunning, territorial intelligence of the Finnish farmer. And on the Kala River front, this strategic failure found its single greatest executioner, Simo Häyhä. He was simply the physical embodiment of the successful Motti tactics. In the middle of the carnage at the Kala River, assigned to the 34th Infantry Regiment, was Simo Häyhä. His story is so often mythologized that the crucial, foundational facts are overlooked. Häyhä was born into a simple farming family, and his background was entirely rural. His war service amounted to a single mandatory year in 1925. His true technical skill came from years as a civilian marksman in the local civil guard, where he accumulated countless trophies. He was not just a good shot. He was a master of his specific craft, understanding windage, ballistics, and the effects of extreme cold with an intuitive precision few engineers could match. He entered the war not as a trained military asset, but as a local expert who knew the landscape better than any map. When issued his weapon, it was the Finnish M/28-30 rifle, known affectionately by Finnish soldiers as the Pistikorva, Spitz. This rifle was a highly tuned, domestically produced version of the Russian Mosin Nagant. It was accurate and reliable, but it was equipped with standard, fixed iron sights. Critically, Häyhä's commanding officer offered him the standard-issue sniper upgrade, a rifle mounted with a powerful, modern PE-4 scope. Häyhä flatly refused. This choice, the rejection of a technology meant to enhance killing at long range, is the first, most pivotal decision that defined the White Death. For Häyhä, the scope was not an advantage, it was a cluster of fatal liabilities in the Finnish winter. He knew a scoped rifle was a death sentence. He identified 4 critical flaws. First, fog and ice. At -40, the glass would instantly fog up with his breath, rendering it useless. Second, exposure. A sniper must raise his head significantly higher to align the sight picture through a scope. That small, dark elevation against the snow made his helmet a visible target for anyone else looking closely. Third, and perhaps most fatally, reflection. The glass lens of a scope acts like a mirror. In the intense, bright winter sunlight, even a minute shift in angle would send a visible flash or glint, a beacon visible for hundreds of meters, betraying his exact position. Finally, speed. Häyhä was simply faster with his open iron sights, trained to acquire and fire with instantaneous precision. He understood that his strength lay not in range, but in invisibility and speed at a moderate distance of 400 to 500 yards. He did not need a 1,000-yard shot, he needed to be a ghost. He took his iron-sighted rifle and designed a system of survival that transformed his environment into his ultimate weapon. Häyhä's success was not a matter of luck or superhuman eyesight, but a brilliant, practical application of physics and snow mechanics. His crazy trick was, in fact, an integrated system of 3 primary environmental modifications, each designed to counteract the Red Army's specific training for locating a sniper. We can categorize the first 2 as concealment protocols. Concealment Protocol 1, the ice wall and muzzle blast suppression. The most immediate and obvious signature of any rifle shot is the muzzle flash and the puff of smoke it generates. The Soviets were trained to immediately spot this, pinpoint the location, and saturate the area with machine gun or artillery fire. Häyhä eliminated this threat by spending hours building a custom fortification in front of his firing position. He would tightly pack snow, and then, using a small canteen or other water source, he would pour liquid over the leading edge to create a thin, solid sheet of ice. When he fired, this ice wall acted as a barrier, effectively blocking the low, horizontal dispersal of the smoke and flash, trapping the signature harmlessly close to the ground beneath the snowline. This eliminated the visual evidence. Furthermore, the mass of the compacted ice wall served as a sound dampener, absorbing the initial shockwave and preventing the air displacement that would ripple the snow, which could betray his position to a keen eye or a directional microphone. Concealment Protocol 2, the Snow Eater Protocol, the breath trick. The second protocol was entirely physiological. In air at -40 degrees, every exhalation produces a large, obvious plume of white vapor. For a sniper lying still, this visible cloud of breath, rising from the snow, is an unmistakable identifier, a smoking gun without the gun. Häyhä's ingenious solution was simple. He would pack snow into his mouth. By constantly holding a mouthful of snow, he insulated the air he exhaled. The snow acted as a heat sink, forcing his warm, moist breath to pass through the super-chilled mass before escaping his lips. This process neutralized the moisture and heat, preventing the visible white cloud of vapor from forming. He could breathe normally, but his signature was eliminated. After taking a shot, he would slowly melt and swallow the snow water, staying hydrated without ever moving to a water source. This practice solved the invisible breath problem and also provided critical hydration, allowing him to stay motionless and vigilant for hours in the brutal cold. These two tricks alone, the ice wall and the snow eater protocol, turned Häyhä into a truly invisible assassin. The third element of Häyhä's system was not passive defense, but active psychological warfare and offensive technical exploitation, categorized as his elevation deception. This trick was designed to neutralize the growing Soviet threat of dedicated counter-sniper teams. Realizing they were facing a professional, the Red Army mobilized their best shots, equipped with the very scopes and optics Häyhä had rejected. These teams were tasked exclusively with hunting the White Death. Häyhä's first part of the deception involved eliminating the signature of digging in. Instead of leaving a large pile of spoil snow, he dug a low-profile firing hole and scattered the excess snow into natural-looking, irregular mounds, incorporating some of it into his ice wall. His actual firing position was always low, protected, and when he abandoned it, he could simply pull a small, light white canvas tarp over the hole, leaving a seamless snow drift. The Soviet countersnipers, looking for disturbances in the snow, found nothing. The core of the ghost hunter strategy, however, was in the optics trap. Häyhä knew the enemy was relying heavily on their scopes, which meant they were looking through glass. As discussed, glass reflects sunlight. Häyhä mastered the ability to spot the minute, faint shimmer or glint of a scope's lens reflection from great distances, a signature that was obvious to his sharp, unmagnified eye against the white backdrop. Once he spotted that telltale shimmer, he knew he had an exact bead on the enemy sniper's head. He would use his rapid-fire iron sights to instantly place a bullet directly through the countersniper's objective lens. This devastating tactic was confirmed through subsequent Finnish reports of captured and recovered Soviet sniper teams. Häyhä didn't just avoid countersnipers, he actively used their reliance on technology as a means to find and kill them. The Soviets were driven to a state of outright paranoia. They were losing their most elite and expensive soldiers to a phantom. The psychological effect of this became part of Häyhä's score. He was credited with personally eliminating 25 Soviet countersnipers who were dispatched specifically to kill him. This systematic elimination effectively shut down the entire Soviet countersniper operation on that front. They had to resort to desperate industrial tactics, using massed artillery barrages or indiscriminate bombing runs on any suspected position, turning acres of virgin forest into smoldering wasteland in a desperate attempt to kill one quiet farmer. The cost in munitions and manpower was astronomical, all directed at one man who had mastered the art of being nothing. The true testament to Häyhä's systematic efficiency lies in the unromantic, factual numbers recorded in the Finnish military archives. Between December 1939 and March 1940, in a span of just 100 days of continuous combat, Simo Häyhä's official logbook credited him with 505 confirmed kills using his iron-sighted M/28-30 rifle. This record, an average of 5 enemy soldiers killed every single day, remains the highest confirmed sniper count in the history of warfare. For a man who was fighting a conventional army with unconventional means, this was an impossible score, yet the archival records stand. Crucially, the 505 figure is only part of the story. Häyhä was not exclusively a sniper, he was a highly efficient light infantryman. During the same period, he also used the Finnish Suomi KP/31 submachine gun for close-quarters engagement against Soviet patrols that strayed too close. Conservatively, he added an estimated 200 confirmed kills with the submachine gun, bringing his total documented tally to over 700 men killed in just over 3 months. The impact was no longer tactical, it was operational. The sheer volume of casualties delivered by a single individual was so damaging to Soviet morale that reports confirm entire detachments would actively refuse to patrol in the areas known to be frequented by the Belaya Smirt. The Soviet desperation reached a fever pitch. Having failed with countersnipers, artillery, and bombing runs, they resorted to psychological warfare of their own. Soviet commanders began placing large, crude decoy figures and scarecrows in the snow, hoping that Häyhä would waste a precious round and give away his position. Häyhä, with his infinite patience, simply waited for the Soviet soldier who was sent out to check on the decoy. The Motti tactics had been refined by one man into a perfect, deadly game of predator and prey. However, even a ghost can eventually be touched. On March 6, 1940, Häyhä was finally wounded. It was during a close-quarters engagement, not a duel with a sniper, but an ambush with a patrol, that a Soviet soldier managed to fire a high-explosive round. The bullet struck Häyhä in the lower left jaw, shattering the bone and sending him into a deep, immediate unconsciousness in the blood-stained snow. His comrades retrieved him, rushing him back behind the lines, believing he was already dead. The wound was massive, literally tearing off a piece of his cheek and jawbone. The terror he had inflicted on the Soviets had cost him a piece of his own life. Simo Häyhä's journey into legend culminated not in death, but in a long, arduous recovery. He fell into a coma for 7 days, waking up in the hospital bed on the exact day peace was declared, March 13, 1940. Finland, despite the horrific odds, had retained its independence, albeit at the cost of 11% of its territory. Häyhä had personally contributed to that improbable survival. For his actions, he received the highest non-commissioned jump in Finnish military history, being promoted from corporal to second lieutenant. But the cost was immense. He underwent 26 major operations to reconstruct his jaw and face, which had been terribly disfigured by the high-explosive round. He bore the scars for the rest of his long life, a permanent, physical reminder of the war he almost single-handedly influenced. Yet, when asked about the trauma or the immense volume of killing, Häyhä's responses were consistently dispassionate and profound, reflecting the Sisu of his character. He famously stated, "I did what I was told to do as well as I could. And in a moment of pure, raw determination, I only regret I didn't get to kill more." His regret was not personal, it was strategic, the regret of a soldier who had to stop defending his home before the enemy was fully vanquished. He lived a quiet life, returning to his farm, focusing on moose hunting and dog breeding, accepting the farm gifted to him by the state. He died in 2002 at the age of 96, a simple farmer who had earned his place as a national hero and an immortal military legend. His story, however, is not merely a piece of folklore, it is a declassified lesson in military doctrine. The immediate aftermath of the Winter War forced a complete and embarrassing overhaul of Soviet military strategy. They had to radically redesign their uniforms, issue Arctic-grade equipment, and learn the hard lessons of Motti tactics. More specifically, Häyhä's principles, the rejection of high-profile optics, the mastery of environmental concealment, and the suppression of breath and muzzle flash, were not officially part of any training manual before 1940. They were the original missing pages of the archival record. Today, every modern military and specialized sniper unit trains on the principles pioneered by this small Finnish farmer. He proved that technological superiority is meaningless when met with ingenuity, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and an immovable will. He is the ultimate proof that the man behind the rifle is always the greatest weapon.